Hello and welcome to the MBOM podcast, where you will learn to master the business of yoga with guests from around the world who have experienced becoming successful yoga teachers, studio owners, and much more. Now, here's your host, Amanda Kingsmith.
Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of the MBOM podcast. Today on the podcast, I have special guest Jenny Parum, who's joining me from Dallas, Texas. And Jenny is the founder of the yoga movement based out of Dallas. And she's here to share how yoga has impacted her life, what she's learned through opening a yoga studio as a single mom, how she's balanced being a mom with being an entrepreneur, everything she's learned through owning and running a yoga studio, and lots of tips and tricks and pieces of advice for all of you new yoga teachers out there. So I hope that you really enjoy this interview. It was really fun talking to Jenny. And without further ado, here she is. I'm very excited to be joined by Jenny Parum today. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today, Jenny.
Thanks for having me.
And you're joining me from Dallas, Texas. Is that right?
That's right.
Awesome. I was thinking we would start the interview with how you first got into yoga.
Oh, well, that's a good question. So let's see. Because at the time, I was a stay-at-home mom for 3 little children. And to stay sane, I had a little side art business where I did custom paintings and custom art for designers that they would place in spaces. And so one of my gigs was a project consulting for redesign of my client's fitness center, which was great because one of the perks that I had was access to the fitness center. And so I hadn't been to a gym in years. So busy home life and single income. This was like quite a luxury. So once a week, I went to the gym and I was super excited. But the catch was I had like previous 15 years worth of rheumatoid arthritis just setting into my body and taking over. So the first meeting with the personal trainer was an absolute joke. Because I was still dealing with severe inflammation and joint degeneration. And, I was just hopeful to be able to move again.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was my first entry. So my little chat with Kyle, he was this big, beefy, personal trainer guy, was, comical, first of all, because I couldn't do any of the things that he was asking me to do, even for the just general assessment. So at the end of our session, he said something to the effect of, well, ma'am, at your age, I was 32 at the time, by the way, apparently nearly dead. Wow. But at your age, you're probably not going to be able to any muscle or, anything. He didn't have very high expectations of me, but, we'll just try to tone what you've got. And that was the message that I had is, you really we can't do anything for you, basically. So here, go get some 2-pound dumbbells and, and get to it. So I fired him and said, thanks a bunch.
I was going to say, what a discouraging experience. Like, oh, you're 32, your life is over, you're never going to be fit again. Yeah. But he was like, I don't know, 6 foot, 13 inches tall. And if I could have punched him in the face, I would have, but I couldn't reach the bloke. So anyway, I just said, I've heard some good things about yoga. I'll give that a try. And he basically just said, yeah, okay, good luck. And so I tried and, I stepped into a yoga studio for the first time. And it was gem yoga, but I had this amazing teacher and she was this tiny little thing. And I'm no giant myself, but she was little bitty. And the things that she could do were just, to me it sounded like she was saying, okay, balance on your left foot and wrap your right leg around your head. And, it was just absurd. And I would look at her, and apparently I looked at her like she had gone crazy. And she would tell me, it's okay, you just try. And I can still hear her voice saying, it's okay, you just try. Just balance on your fingertips, it's fine. And so I said, okay. And so I tried, and I felt better after the first practice than I went into. So I had one of the syndromes that's associated with rheumatoid arthritis is Raynaud's syndrome, where it's like a loss of circulation almost in your hands, particularly is where I
experienced it, but my fingers would just go white and numb, just completely dead, especially when it was really cold outside. So my first class was in February, and I remember going in with just these, clammy white hands. And, we came out of Shavasana and I looked at my hands, and it was the first time I had seen them pink in a long time.
Wow.
And that was just the first thing I would remember is like, I can feel my hands. I can feel my hands. So next Friday I went back to the same class, and that's how I started, just one Friday at a time.
That's amazing to hear that just after one class, it's like you experienced this amazing positive side effect to the arthritis.
Oh, it was, yes, immediate. I was sore, so very sore, and everything hurt, and I took those 2-pound dumbbells that my beefy trainer guy, laughed at me because I couldn't lift them up, but I took those with me, and anything that was on hands and knees, I had to use those because I couldn't open up my hands enough, to set my hands and knees on the floor. So everything was modified. Everything.
Wow.
Yeah.
And what's that like? What's the arthritis like now for you? Like, is it manageable through yoga?
It's completely gone in my own body. So, I don't know any other way to say that.
That's incredible.
So it's been, let's see, that first class was about, my goodness, just over 10 years exactly. And, let's see, I've had very little to no effect of the disease in the last, I would say, 6 to 7 years.
Wow, that's absolutely amazing. Like, obviously, as a practitioner and a teacher, I know that yoga makes me feel amazing, and I know that, but to actually have that experience is so incredible. It's remarkable.
Even in my own body, so sometimes it's hard to believe because I still very much feel and have compassion for other people in pain. So, obviously this was, I have quite a passion for helping others find wellness and possibility. If full, complete recovery and wellness isn't in their path, but at least possibility is. So, one of the phrases from my teacher, BKS Iyengar, yoga will help you cure what cannot be endured or teach you to endure what cannot be cured. And that just stuck with me. So for me, it was through my body to get to my mind, and then my mind to actually enhance the body. And other people have, similar effects. So if we can't get over it, we'll get through it.
Yeah, definitely. I love that. And so was it this like powerful experience that you had in your body that inspired you to teach?
Yes, absolutely. And that tiny little Filipino teacher that said to me, Jenny, and this was about a year into the practice, I would say, that she suggested, she said, I think you should look at being a teacher. And I didn't even know that was, it wasn't even something that I had considered. It wasn't on my radar at all. I was just trying to figure out how to, manage a house with 3 little children and have some peace, and quiet. So at the time I was, married and trying to figure out how to manage, that relationship, which, after that dissolved. So, lots of moving parts in my little life. And my body wasn't one of the more fluid ones. So, we got through it.
Yeah, definitely. It's amazing to hear, like, coming to yoga from a place of like feeling uncomfortable in your body and then having this like incredible change in how you're feeling. And then that, inspiring you to teach. I definitely understand that. It's like you have 3 kids at home and somebody's like, you should become a yoga teacher. And you're like, I don't know. It seems like a lot to take on when I've got to, feed 3 mouths.
Right. Exactly. You have no idea. I remember, actually my ex-husband at the time, or my husband at the time, now ex was, he had, was working for a consulting firm, but then was laid off. So he had, all 5 of us in the house. And I thought, it seems like somebody should be going to work. So, and I remember sitting my 3 children down on the sofa and explaining to them, okay, so for the first time in your little lives, mom is going to go to work. And here's what that looks like. And really it was that practice of authentic conversation that I was learning from the yoga practice, that said, here's what that means for you and I. Here's what our time commitment looks like. And these little guys are little bitty. They're, 7, 6, and probably 4.5 at that time. And, they said, okay. They didn't know any better, so I would have little goal charts, okay, well, when mom does this, then this is what it means for the family and we get to do this. Yay. And that's how it started. I started in the absolute busiest time of my life. I was going back to work outside of my home. I'd been an entrepreneur for about 15 years on a small scale, but I was doing it. And first time working for someone else. And, while I was at it, why don't you go through teacher training? That seems like a dandy idea.
What was that like for you, like doing your teacher training while balancing your children who seem like they're supportive, but, they're still young, right? They don't really entirely understand.
Yeah, they were, yeah. It was just something I couldn't not do. As probably the best way to explain it. And it was I could feel that it was my way to something different that I had to explore in my life. And that was my avenue. I mean, since we had returned to Texas when the children were born, I'd spent some time in the Northwest. And when I got back to Dallas, it was really quite a struggle to, find my people, to really feel like I had a community. I was already giving this, living naturally a try and was really pursuing that and studied a lot of nutrition to try to help manage the arthritis naturally. But it was really difficult for me to find other like-minded people, and not just in the wellness, but just in general. So I was not exactly the typical stay-at-home mother. Because, I was up and out. Let's go somewhere. But, at the time that meant I would swallow a handful of Advil and do my best and get out there. So I just had to. It was hope for me, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely. That's really inspiring to hear. And then did you start teaching right away?
Let's see. I was probably 1.5 years into the practice before this was suggested to me. So, and then after that, so it was, probably 2 years after I began practicing yoga. Yes, I got my certification and I was hired onto the studio that I was training at pretty immediately. And then I haven't stopped since. So
that's amazing.
It's been a blast. Yeah.
Yeah. And, what was it like starting out as a yoga teacher after not having had a job like that for so long and then also managing that with a family?
Yeah. Well, actually my first job was working in an athletics store, the famous Lululemon.
I worked at Lululemon too.
Yes. So then you'll understand some of the culture, but, I was invited by another, suggested to me that I speak with this gal. So I thought, okay, well, I'll go get this job and then I can be connected to, the athletic and the yoga community in Dallas and just see what people are up to. That was my master plan. And so I committed to that for a year, which I did, and I had this, I must admit, I had quite this arrogant little attitude of I'm going to work in a mall selling $100 stretchy pants. I really couldn't wrap my head around that. But again, they were going to pay me to practice yoga. So, okay, let's go. So, that was the day-to-day job. So teaching in the studio was, I would say, more natural to me than that, though it's all a relationship business. So, anywhere you are, I think, when you're in that type of industry, you're helping people. So teaching was natural to me. To be in that setting and guide people was natural.
Okay, yeah, cool. I can definitely relate to those feelings about Lululemon, because I had come from like the corporate world, and I was pretty young, like 25, but I still felt like, oh, I have this business degree, like I should be doing something like better than working at Lululemon. And so anytime my friends made like passive aggressive jabs at me, I'd be like, well, I get to work out for free. So, and I get a massive discount on Lululemon clothes. So,
right. Exactly. Oh my goodness. Yep. But what I loved about it is I had the opportunity, of course, to practice daily.
Totally.
Right. But I got to build relationships all throughout Dallas. And that was invaluable. So to help me find my personal tribe and to really see what was jiving in Dallas, was amazing. And then, Lululemon, one of the things that we were, that I really loved was the personal development side of things.
Same.
So helping, so helping myself, find what I wanted out of life and then helping others do the same was huge. And I kept finding that I was dreaming too small. So my biggest lesson, I think, and I had these grandiose goals that I would write down and, in 5 years I will, do this and this and this. And then I would find that I would accomplish those goals in 6 to 9 months. And I'm like, well, blast. I don't know what I'm supposed to do next. I haven't even thought beyond this point. I didn't realize what was possible for me. And so the more that I built these relationships with like-minded people, then I realized quite a lot was possible. And I did have a voice and I did have something to offer. And, the more I discovered that in myself, the more it was just amplified that I had to get out and do it. So I got bolder and bolder.
That's awesome. I love that. And at that point, is that when you decided you wanted to open your own studio?
Oh, I fought that at every step. I did not want to open a studio. I was not going to open a studio. It was not the path I was going to take. No, no, and no. It's what I kept saying. And I didn't want the overhead. There were already, there's already enough yoga in the city. I had all of these excuses. But what it came down to was afraid of failing. I had this idea that if I were to do something like that, I had to do it all. And I didn't feel that I was skilled enough. I wasn't enough. I had all of this language going on. But then a student showed me the space. So, time lapse 5 years later, a student showed me a space that she was looking at and said, oh, I just, love yoga and I would love to have a yoga studio. But she didn't have any yoga experience, nor did she have any business experience. So, that sounds neat, but I don't think I'm your gal. But, now my personal partner and business partner, he and I just, would drive by and walk by the space all the time. And we just couldn't ignore it. So we would call the number on the window and we got the numbers. And then we'd sit with it. And then we'd walk by it again. We'd sit with it. And both of us have this little entrepreneurial spirit. So we thought, let's just take a look. So we looked at the space and then I looked at the numbers. And for the past, probably 5 years, I had been teaching in 2 well-known studios. One of them was a national brand studio here in Dallas. So I understood the trends, I knew when students were going to be there and when they're not. And we really just sat down at a table and I started mapping out month by month what a yoga attendance on a moderate scale might look like, with no expectations of taking current students necessarily. They had a place to do yoga. But did I think that I could get 7 people on a mat on any day? This were the moderate numbers I was starting with. And we put those averages together and see what it came up with. And, in fact, at even moderate levels, we weren't going to lose money. And I thought, well, it's worth a try. And so we went to work.
That's awesome. And what was the process like to actually set up the studio? Because I feel like, you know, I talk to people who are like, yes, I've got this vision and I've got this goal and I want to do it. But like, what are the steps to actually, you know, getting a studio from, okay, I found a space to I'm actually like opening the doors to people coming to practice?
Sure. A lot. Let me tell you that. So I was, in my own integrity, I was committed to not talking about it until I knew it was a sure deal. And to be fair to the studios that I was working for, it was just important to me that I had my ducks in a row before I did anything or spoke to anybody. And that meant getting along with the city and obtaining a certificate of occupancy. So it's just a document that says, yes, you have the rights to business here. Everything is to code. You have parking for, you know, your projected number of people that are coming. You know, it's zoned for the right use. All of those things had to be in order. So I had to learn really quickly how to deal with the people at the city. So I did all of the legwork to get a site map drawn for the space and arrange for the inspectors. And, on the back end, we were preparing for the space to be flipped. And that meant demoing everything that was in it and resurfacing the walls, the floors, the bathroom, and everything in between. But we had the mindset of, like I mentioned earlier, the people were the main feature of this business. So we didn't go into it with trying to keep up with the hottest, trendiest studio. I wanted a clean, simple, modern space and uncluttered space, and let the people be the feature once they were in the studio. And then that would be phase one. If there were modifications or updates that we wanted to do afterwards, cool. But we started with just a really simple, modern, classy space. So behind the scenes, we were preparing for all the renovations, and which basically had all of that on hold until the city granted us that CO. And that took me a back and forth. We determined about 6 weeks and about 42 hours of my time.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy.
It was a little crazy.
42 hours. That's like a full-on work week.
It was. It was. And mind you, I was still teaching yoga full-time, and at this point was a single mom of 3 preteens.
Wowzers.
Time was precious. When I say it out loud, it's kind of silly, but
I mean, I think it's admirable that you did that. I definitely am not jealous of that.
Oh,
I think it shows your commitment to this project, though, and like how passionate and driven you were, for sure. Like to do all of that, it would have been probably much easier to be like, you know what, it's not the right time to open the studio. We'll put it on hold.
Yeah, no, it was, there was this glitch in the paperwork. Basically, one paper didn't match another paper, and in the owners, their original plans didn't match what the modern plan did. So the city just wasn't budging. But basically, once they realized, oh, there's a typo, it really all came down to a typo on the paper after these 42 hours. Yes. Anyway, that was resolved, and they slid a paper across the desk, and I left there. I made 2 phone calls, and the space was flipped in a week, and I opened 2 weeks later.
Wow. Had you already figured out who was going to help teach, or were you teaching all the classes at that point?
Yes. No, I did have a few other teachers, and I started with a really moderate schedule, really just the basics. And I would say one of the life lessons I learned is I started with, seeking out other entrepreneurs that were really wanting a space to teach their method with their voice unfiltered. And one of my personal frustrations in teaching for other spaces was I was teaching to their style, to their script, to their expectations, instead of really feeling like I had the liberty to teach a student. And so, from listening to other teachers in the city for those 5 years, I went looking for teachers that were really clear on what they wanted to teach, but didn't have a space that they felt they could do that. And so started somewhat naively, I would say, on a donation model, which meant it was a split revenue between the teachers and the studio. In the studio, we would reinvest and, use it for marketing and paying for the space in my 42 hours at the city. But really had no intentions, my partner and I had no intentions of taking a paycheck from that studio in that first year. I had developed a private clientele and, I really just transferred classes that I was teaching at other studios. I maintained a very similar schedule, just because that's what worked for my schedule and my family life. Not that I was trying to take, students from their studios. It's just, let's try to maintain some sort of familiarity for my family's sake.
Right.
And so once I got, it was just, I'm already doing things on this schedule. I needed to maintain that.
Yeah.
And then I filled in the gaps with the other teachers. Let's see. I probably had 6 other teachers that launched the studio.
Okay, cool. That's a pretty solid number of teachers.
Right. Yeah.
I love what you were talking about with finding teachers who are more like entrepreneurial minded and who have, their style and are looking to teach that style. Because that's really what I guess kind of like I kind of promote is that as yoga teachers, we should really all be entrepreneurs. And it's more about like we find space at people's studios, but we're not employees, even though we technically are employees. But it's sort of this mindset shift of you work for yourself. So you can build your own schedule. You can choose the places you teach. And with that, I think comes the ability to really allow like your brand and your voice to shine through in whichever space that you teach.
Yes, absolutely.
So what was that first year of owning the studio like?
It was remarkable. You got to wear every hat. You got to be the janitor, the CEO, the accountant, the counselor. You got to hire people. You got to fire people. You were the marketing team, and still at the end of the day, you had to figure out right from left. and your students weren't the only ones ready for Shavasana. So, you work twice as hard as you think you have to. But there's 4 times as much work than you expect. But at the end of the day, it was 10 times more rewarding. So I would say, you asked about the first year, I would say the first 18 months, we didn't stop hustling. It was, my partner and I don't share a space. We don't live together, but we're in constant communication. So we would start every morning, as he would commute to work. I was getting ready, and we'd say, great, what's working today? What can we do better? What's on our plate? Awesome. And then we would talk 5 more times throughout the day. And at the end of the day, we would say, great, what worked well? What can we do better? What's on our plate for tomorrow? And that's how we got through the first year and a half.
That's amazing.
Yeah. But one of the things I think was, you kind of have to have a filter or a gauge, I would say, to know if you're on track or not. So there's, of course, making a business plan and those initial running of the numbers and making sure that you can actually have a viable business was important. But once we got there, we said, okay, well, what do we stand for? What are we doing? Are we clear about why we want to open this studio? So we, dug through that a little bit, and I love that he was already of the mindset of setting goals and really being clear on all of that. So thank goodness. But, he's a yogi and also a business person as well. So it was a really helpful fit. But it really came down to us writing our business plan, but including these 3 business goals. And they just, they're with me all of the time as my little filter. Am I delivering a quality practice with integrity? And are our teachers doing the same? Are we creating sustainable monthly growth? And then rule number 3, are we having fun? And if any one of those rules goes off, then we stop and we evaluate what's going on. And then you just plan for things to change. If you can plan for things to change, if you have, plan B, C, D, elemental P ready, then you're good to go. You're dealing with ever-changing times and people's lives. So,
yeah, I think that that's great advice, is to have sort of these things that are really important to you. And I love that fun was included in there, because I think that some people have these really passionate ideas, or these ideas that stem from their passions, and then they dive into it and it becomes very overwhelming and unfun. And coming back to that place of why did I get into this? Why do I love doing this is so important.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. We're in the business of guiding people. What an honor, and to be in their space. But at the end of the day, it is also still a business. And it's, I think it's a special mindset to be able to do both. So I think the two can coexist. You can, live authentic, yoga, philosophically sound lives and still do business at the same time and be successful in both. So that was important to me that we set up a business that accommodated that.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you talk a little bit more about some of the things that you did to ensure that? Because I think that some people also the idea of bringing money into, or business into, this sort of spiritual practice can be, I think, a little bit uncomfortable and almost confusing to people sometimes.
Sure. I would learn from the masters. One of the things I observed was these other teachers that would travel in that had been at it a lot longer than I had. And even their teachers said there's an exchange of energy and of resources in order for people to grow and thrive. So if you can, that was one of the things that I had to get over for myself in business, is just being okay accepting money from others. But I realized that as I'd mentioned earlier, I was thinking really small. So, which is why I was in a lot of debt and started with nothing. So for me to say, no, I have something unique and I have something to offer, and it is worth something, and the quality of life and the vitality that you'll gain from it is also worth something, and we can put a fair number on that, then I just was okay with it. I just decided and I chose to be okay with it. But for me, that was just my check of then personal integrity to make sure I was offering a product, if you want to call it that in business terms, that was worth that price, which meant I was present, right? I worked, I knew my topic. I was invested in their personal growth and their yoga practice. And I was able to meet them with whatever problems, issues, and goals that they had. And this could be an individual in front of me, or this could be a class of 15 people. It doesn't matter. I walked in with that attitude of, I am absolutely and fully yours right here and right now. And I think that being present with them that much is what gives that quality experience that's worth the compensation that we're asking.
Yeah, I love that. I think that that's such a good way to look at it, is coming back to your personal integrity. So it's not like there's a specific number that you should ask for or whatnot that makes it right or wrong. It's looking at what am I offering and how much is that worth? How much time am I putting into that? And always checking back with yourself. That's really cool.
Yeah.
And so going back to this, being a mom and having a family while running a business, how did you balance having three, almost teenagers with starting this busy yoga studio?
Sure. Well, let's see. First of all, they're, currently 17, 14, and 12 and a half. So we've been through a lot. And their lives are busy too. oldest is a graduating senior this year, plays cello, writes music, is quite an intellect. I've got my 14-year-old is running all over the place with friends and is practicing violin. And, if I sit still long enough, all my hair and makeup will be done. And then my 12-and-a-half-year-old boy wants to, run around and do parkour and go play Frisbee. And, I got to keep up. So it's a really fun, lively life. But what I love about it is I got to design what my daily life looked like. And it was really important that I was the person that was home in the morning when they got up and got ready for school. And, now they're old enough to do a lot of their own, and they love the independence. But, I love that my life begins after they go to school, and I get to do that. And that I'm home every afternoon when they get home from school. And we've got those few hours to run around to here and there and everywhere. So I really was, I wanted to say lucky, but that wasn't it. It was really by design. And I truly think that I was able to manifest the type of, daily schedule that worked for me and my family. So most of my teaching happens, while they're at school. That's about 4 or 5 sessions a day, in the middle of the day, with, only one studio class in a weekday evening. And, so Sundays I teach, 2 studio classes and have 2 clients, but Saturday is now a day off, which is, by the way, this is the first Saturday I'm going to have off in about 7 years. Can I tell you how excited I am?
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. What are you going to do?
You're going to laugh, but I'm probably going to go shoot some new photography so that I can update my website. There's my day off.
Life as an entrepreneur is so much more glamorous from the outside than it is on the inside. You're like, I'm taking a day off, but I'm still technically working. But I love what I do, so it's fine.
Yeah, it is a blurry line between, have to and get to. So, it's great. I love it.
Yeah.
So I just, I designed it to where I made myself as available as I could for them.
Right. Did it take setting boundaries with your other teachers? Where it's I need people to teach these classes. I don't teach before 9 a.m. type thing. Or how did you go about creating that schedule for yourself?
It's interesting. When I went I set my schedule before I had other teachers. And I said, here's when I'm teaching. And then here's usually what I do when I'm looking for a teacher, or I'm courting a teacher, as I would like to say, is I would love to know what your ideal schedule looks like. And then at the same time, I would also love to know when you feel you would be able to reach the people that you want to reach. And then let's plug that into the studio schedule and see where that fits. Because if you're just filling teachers in time slots, but that's not when their demographic is teaching, then you're not setting them up for success. So I really looked for the people that could connect to their demographic and when that demographic would come to the studio. So kind of a little different than what I had seen and executed at other studios before. But that put the right people in the right seat of the bus most of the time.
That's actually the first time I've ever heard anyone put it like that. And I think that that's so smart. I love that. Looking at, somebody's young and they're connecting with other 20, 25-year-olds and they're teaching, spunky, vinyasa flow, power flow classes. The noon class is probably not the time where you're going to get those people. They're probably going to come in the evening. And so have them in, the 7 p.m. time slot.
Exactly.
That's such a great way of doing that. I feel like a lot of the time, or it seems like in my experience with sort of the back end of studio work is if you don't have enough teachers, it's this balance of making sure they have enough hours and then just filling in subs whenever people can teach. And it can be kind of this frenetic process a lot of the time.
Right. And that's what I had experienced, and I didn't care for it. And it seemed to make a lot of sense. I'll back up a little bit. So before that, when my partner and I were setting up the studio, it was important to me that it wasn't operated from this place of, I want to say angst. There wasn't this desperation to it. Instead, I wanted to move constantly from this place of inspiration of, we have a group of people that need yoga and need to be served, and that happens at 9 a.m. on a Monday and a Wednesday. Great, I've got the perfect teacher for that. Instead of forcing a teacher to be there on Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 9 a.m., not knowing if we have an audience or not even knowing if that's who they're going to connect with or not. That just seems really backwards to me. So I wouldn't put a class on the schedule if it didn't look like it was going to be a good fit. Just because someone wanted to teach, that really wasn't how we went about it. Now, if they were really clear and they also had identified that that's when they could reach their people, then yes, absolutely, we'll make space for that. But for the longest time, I didn't have a class at noon on Tuesday because the right person hadn't presented themselves.
Right. Yeah. I love the
intentionality behind that. I would rather not have a class. Yeah. And it seemed to work well. These are yoga teachers. There's going to be a lot of turnover. We're not known to be the most stable bunch.
It's interesting because so many people get into yoga. I don't know what comes first with this, but it seems like a lot of people who are in like the yoga space, yoga teachers, like they love to travel, they love to move around, they're like constantly changing and shifting, and I feel like that accounts for like a lot of the turnover.
Yeah, I do. But that it tended not to be who we attracted as we progressed as a studio. So one of the things that was important is that they understood how to make those personal connections and start to cultivate community. Since that was such a big thing that was lacking in my life, one of the visions that I had well before I had even met yoga, knew anything about this life, was I really was yearning to have some sort of center where people could come and learn and have resources and have classes and connect with other people trying to do the same things. And before I met yoga, I thought that meant classes for personal development or how to run a house or how to raise children naturally, those types of things. So I already knew I wanted to create this hub for the community where they could feel safe and come if they needed anything and knew that they had a friend when they got there. And that's probably been such the beautiful process in making this studio happen, was finding those people, the teachers is what I'm calling the people, that understood that. So when the teachers came to practice and then they knew that they were hooked, right? I found my family. Then that was the one that I said, wonderful. I would love for you to teach for us.
Right.
And now that we're a well-known studio, then people will reach out to us all the time and send their yoga resume or whatever you want to call it. And I say, awesome. I don't believe we've met. And I typically answer the best way to get involved is to be involved.
Right.
Come show your face. Understand why do you want to teach here? Understand why we're different and what are you up to?
Yeah.
So we don't know you yet.
I think that's such a big thing for yoga teachers to remember, especially if you're kind of new to the industry. And it kind of comes back to this idea of like being an entrepreneur as opposed to an employee. Like I think that it's like
right.
you can come out of teacher training or you can enter the yoga world and feel really desperate for somebody to hire you. And it should be just as much about like you interviewing that studio as that studio owner interviewing you. Like sending an email is so impersonal. Like you're like trying to get a job somewhere that you've never actually been, like that you don't even know if you work with. And then
right.
that studio owner is turning back to you and being like, I don't know you either. There's my home studio in Canada. I've interviewed the studio owner for the podcast as well. And he put it Like, he's like, my students are like my children. Like, I wouldn't just let a babysitter come in and just babysit my children when I'd never met them before. I was like,
yes, exactly.
Perfect analogy. Like, you work so hard to create this community, and you're not going to just let anyone come in there and be a part of that.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. So it's interesting, sometimes I have coaching for prospective teachers, and sometimes actually I've had to have coaching and hard to have conversations with prospective students. On the teacher side, it's, especially if you're going to write an email to me and not show up and introduce yourself, you should probably write the letter with my name on it instead of another studio owner's name on it. That'd probably be the first good move. So I've been addressed by another studio's, name and asked for a job. So pay attention.
Doesn't come across very professional.
Not the first, best move. But then I would say the other thing that was important in protecting the space, like these are our children, was really making sure the energy was in the right spirit. And anytime you do something a little bolder, whether it be positive or otherwise, you're going to draw some attention and you're going to have some naysayers. So in the first year of business, one of the things that I was adamant about is the energy in the studio was positive and it was kind. And if any conversation was not, then I carried it outside, and we can talk about anything you want to out in the parking lot, but I wasn't going to leave negative vibes, or let those vibrations rattle through the studio. And that was probably a bolder move than I had been used to making, because I want everybody to be happy. Yeah. And had that people pleaser side of things, but I held us to that from a teacher's standpoint. So if we had a grumbly teacher, then we sat outside and we talked. If I had a student that was grumbly or was talking bad about another studio or talking bad about another student or a teacher, no, we carried it right back outside, and then, kind conversation said, yeah, I can't let that go on in there. And then that started to weed themselves out. And the more light that you create, the more it's hard for darkness to exist in that space. And that's, I would say, one of the distinct things that people notice when they come in.
Right.
Is, wow, it feels good here.
Yeah. What was it like to approach, a student or a teacher and be like, take this conversation outside? As the thought of that kind of makes me feel intimidated to do as a studio owner.
Oh, for sure. It definitely was, because, even opening a studio, I think I caught a lot of people off guard. It was that, kind of being underestimated, because, when I'm an employee, then I'm an employee. And a lot of people hadn't seen me as a leader in that way. So they thought that I was still kind and passive in other situations, until I was the one that actually had the vision and something to protect. And it was this culture and community that was my vision that I wanted to protect. So, when this person perceived that, and there were a few, it's fine, but when they perceived that they knew more than me or knew better than me, because of their personal experience, they weren't clear that I had my own vision and experience as well. So it just was, a lot of nodding and saying, cool, thanks for sharing, but we're really clear on what we're doing. And, you can either be in line with what we've set in place. And I even had that printed. So I had something to refer to, like, this is where we stand. So it seems like you're in a different vibe, and that's cool. There's lots of places for you to teach, but we got to do this plan over here.
Okay.
And
cool.
some would, yeah, it's all in love. Some conversations are a little harder to have just because of personalities involved, but if you can just sit down, right? And you're talking sitting outside in the sunshine and having a heart-to-heart conversation. seems like we should be able to do that as yogis.
Yeah. And as adults as well.
Right.
It's
Grown
like,
people.
It's like this weird thing. It's like we try to teach children that they need to have these conversations and they need to tell people when they don't feel good about something, but it's easy to let that stuff sort of like slip under the rug as adults, because those conversations are uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to say to somebody like, when you do this, I don't feel good.
Right.
But that's amazing that you've cultivated that for your studio.
It's beautiful. It's really pretty amazing. I hope you can come see it someday.
Yeah, definitely. It sounds like I'm picturing it in my head. It sounds like a space that I would like to be in. How long has the studio been open now?
We're approaching our 4th year.
Amazing.
So 3 years and 9 months.
Awesome. Can you talk about some of the biggest business lessons you've learned along the way? I know you've kind of mentioned them here and there, but just a couple off the top of your head.
Sure. I would say, earlier I'd mentioned that at first we were on like a split model, where the teacher had just as much skin in the game as we did as a studio. Let's see, as we brought on new teachers, I would give them the choice. You can be on a split model or you can have a base, pay plus incremental. And I found that, for newer teachers, they had to be excited about coming to the studio. And if they felt like, and those are skills to develop, to understand how to attract people, how to retain them, how to market to them, and I'm asking these teachers, some of them just starting out, to be their own business. And that's, you have to work at it. So if they knew they were going to show up and get $7.50 by the time they were finished, it was just disheartening. And we had grown the studio so that we could, without any problem, pay them a really competitive base rate and then give them a bonus for succeeding beyond these minimums. And that felt just a lot better. So that was probably our biggest lesson, is like, nope, we're changing our pricing system and we're changing how we treat and pay our teachers. And then everything else, let's say you spend less than you think you need to, and get the basics, and spend your time and energy on connecting to the people. Understand how how do you reach them as far as marketing? If you understand what people are coming to the studio, then you understand what their language is. Are they on Facebook? Do they even have any idea what Instagram is? Most of these people that we were trying to reach, did not. So a personal, email, or, having them have easy access to the website was our biggest tool. So we spent more time and energy on those free resources instead of the other marketing things that may have spent a lot more time and money.
I love that. I think that that's such a good thing for people to remember. Like, I just released an episode on social media, and it's like, social media is so great if your audience is on social media. Like, figuring out, how you're going to reach your people is the best way to decide what platforms to use, what platforms not to use.
Right. Exactly. Right. And so so opening the studio, one of my visions was to have a place for people to access the practice. And, I offer a variety of methods, and it was important that people had an entry practice no matter what season of life they were in. And I, all through my 20s was in the season of life that matched an 80-year-old woman. So, I had compassion for the people who were busted up, who were sick, who felt like they couldn't. And I wanted them to feel like they had a place where they could. So the 20% of people that already wore their Lululemon stretchy pants and had a place to go and practice, then great. You have your practice, and if you come past, fine. But I was more interested in the 80% of the population that didn't feel like they had a place to even explore this thing they've heard of called yoga. And that's really where most of our students have come from. Referrals from friends who felt better after they came to yoga.
Cool. That's great. And then I'm curious if, I know we're running short on time here, but if you have any advice for newer yoga teachers. We kind of talked a little bit about like, you know, if you want a job at a studio, come meet the studio owner, see if it's your space before just like firing off an email. Do you have any other advice for people who are kind of new to the industry from a studio owner perspective?
Yes, of course. I would say understand what makes you unique. Everybody has their own experience of why they came to yoga, and they may have a skill set that helps them reach a certain group of people. I would say the more specific you can be and the more you can develop that and have it be a unique offering, then the more successful you'll be.
Cool. Yeah, I think that's a great piece of advice. For people who are like, okay, yeah, that sounds good, but I'm brand new, like how do you have any suggestions on how people can find that?
How to like, find what they're unique at?
Yeah.
Sure. I teach seminars on it. I love it. Oh goodness. I would say understanding, oh my goodness, you know, some of the Lululemon heritage, and some of it I've pulled from that. Some of I've pulled from other personal development, projects. But I would say understand what your personal values are, and then get a grasp on what you personally are really skilled at. You know, if I were to take from Jim Collins' book, Good to Great, then I would say study the hedgehog effect. Understand what you're best in the world at, and then know what you're most passionate about, and then understand what your skill set is of how you can make resources. And then where those three circles overlap, give yourself permission to only do that. We can get so sidetracked with tasks, with jobs, with projects that are someone else's idea instead of what we were really designed and built to do. And we get sidetracked from our own personal goals while we're helping somebody else develop their own personal goals. So it was quite a process for me to take a look at what am I doing things because other people are expecting me to do them, or am I doing things because I'm really clear on what I wanted to do? So as a new teacher, I was accepting teaching gigs everywhere because I wanted to hustle. But the more I refined that and put myself in situations where I was able to teach people that I could really affect, then the better, it was a better use of my energy. So the sooner that you can really identify why you're teaching and which people, that you can reach and share the practice with, then the better. And instead of teaching from obligation or from desperation, just because you want a teaching gig, if you write down, I truly believe if you simply write down what it is you're wanting to do and then start paying attention, then the universe will start providing those opportunities.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's so important. It's like, I feel like there's kind of this evolution as you're a new teacher, is like you kind of accept a lot of things. And I think that it can come from a place of desperation, but it can also come from a place of like trial and error of like, what do I like doing? Do I like teaching in gyms? Do I like teaching in yoga studios? What yoga studios do I fit best with? And finding that like thing that you really like doing and like kind of honing in on that and making it sort of more of your niche.
Yes, exactly. And because of my background, the gym scene was not my scene. The boutique studio was my scene. Those were people that were already in the neighborhoods, and were intimidated to go into those other settings like I was at the time.
Yeah.
So I went and sought out those settings. I suppose it was trial and error, but what I think my biggest lesson was, after doing some work actually with Suzanne Conrad, whom you may be familiar with.
Yeah.
She and I sat down and was trying to figure out why I was hitting my head onto a brick wall. And this was just before I'd opened the studio. But I felt like I was scattered and I was doing all of these things, but I was just running around like a chicken with my head cut off. But what I was figuring out is, again, I was still acting from this place of fear of not being able to succeed or to provide for my 3 children on my own, because who teaches yoga and provides for 3 small children on their own.
Right.
Jenny does.
Living proof that it's possible.
It's possible. And now we're thriving, but at the time she said, okay. And we were working through my declaration and we'd tossed around words for the past 20 minutes, and I'm in front of a group of about 70 of my closest friends, boo-hooing it the whole time. And she said, okay, try this phrase on for size. And she said, okay, I create abundance by doing less and being more. Yes, that's it. Because, all I wanted was to provide abundance for my family.
Right.
But running around everywhere wasn't doing it. And after I had made that declaration, I thought, okay, so how do I be more? I wanted to be more present for my children. I wanted to be more present for my students. And I wanted to not be in my car driving all over the city from class to class. And so I remember there was 2 classes that I was teaching, and it was about 30 minutes away, plus I had to pay tolls to get there. And plus it was a new studio. So I got paid $25 a class for an hour and a half long class.
Yikes.
Which to be there. So, it all boiled down to 6 hours of my time every week. And after paying tolls, I was coming home with $15.
Oh my gosh. $15 divided by 6 hours. That's like $2.75 an hour.
But I stayed because
that.
I felt obligated, like this is not making any sense. And so she challenged me. So she said, what do you really want to do? I said, well, I want to help individuals get well. She said, well, I bet if you helped 3 people a week, then you'd probably make more than $15. So, well, yeah, duh. So I simply wrote that down, and that was, a weekend seminar that I was at, and then I went home, and I tell you, Amanda, I got home and I had written that down, and by the second day that I was home, I quit those 2 classes. And I had 2 new clients. The third one came the next week.
Wow.
And so I was working, instead of those 6 hours, I was teaching for 3 hours a week. And, an exponential difference at that point. I was, coming home with $250 for those 3 hours instead.
Right. That's amazing.
And for a new teacher, that was a pretty good gig.
Yeah. I mean, it's way better than like $2.75, $3 an hour for sure. That's awesome. I love the intentionality behind that. Amazing. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. It's been such a pleasure chatting with you today. Where can people go to find more about you and your studio?
Wonderful. Thanks for asking. You can go to my personal website, jennyparum.com, and there are links there to the studio, or you can go in reverse and find me from the studio, which is yogamovementdallas.com. And if I'm not at home, then I'm at the studio typically.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time today, Jenny. I really appreciate this.
Thank you so much.
All right. So hopefully everyone enjoyed that episode with Jenny Parum from Dallas. I really enjoyed chatting with her, and I learned so much about balancing life as an entrepreneur and being a mom and integrating everything together and still maintaining integrity. And you can find the show notes for this episode at www.mbomyoga.com. You can join the community on Facebook and Instagram at Mastering the Business of Yoga. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, you can send me an email at info@mbomyoga.com. And as always, thanks so much for listening, and namaste.